What is up, YouTube? This is your host, Ranee B, here to spill that homicidal tea. And today, I found this crazy blend of tea in the very back of the cabinet. It's an old, dusty blend with flavors that seem to really fight against each other. They're a really scandalous, clashing finish. It's a little insane. Please like and subscribe. I'm 2 people short of 2,000 subscribers. Come on! So if you haven't subscribed yet, please smash that subscribe button and help me get to my goal. Now that that is all out of the way, let's get straight into it. The vintage solved homicide case of Albert Snyder. In 1895, Ruth Brown was born in New York. She was a determined teen who desired to make it far in life. Ruth made the decision that it would be better for her to quit school in 8th grade and start working for the phone company to get a jump start on her professional career. She chose to concentrate on studying shorthand and typing in the meantime so that she might be able to find an office job somewhere after that, realizing that not all jobs would bring her the real success that she was striving for. You see, Ruth believed that success wasn't just money. It was more like family, starting a family with someone. It was just where you were in your career and your income, and combining that with finding true love and having children. Ruth eventually landed a job at Motorboating magazine in 1914 at the age of 19. I can't even get past that line without Beavis and Butthead popping in my head. Motorboating magazine.
You what?
Okay, girl. Anyway, this is where she met Albert Snyder. He was 32 and totally committed to his career. Well, he was, until he met Ruth, because following their chance encounter, he began to concentrate a lot more on her. Ruth didn't seem to mind at all because he was older. I mean, it didn't bother her that much. He was very gentlemanly. They soon became inseparable. Where's Ruth? With Albert. Where's Albert? He's with Ruth. I mean, it was just crazy. So they made the decision to wed in 1915. Soon after, they had a daughter named Lorraine. Now, Albert played the perfect role of a doting father and providing husband. He had a prosperous job, and he did a good job of supporting his family. They lived in a very nice house in Queens, New York. Now, Albert and Ruth attended a party on March 20th, 1927. Albert really didn't want to go. He wasn't the partying type. He wasn't really social. He was very down to business. Not much of a social butterfly, if you will. Well, Ruth, she was very much into the social scenes and getting out and mingling and all that. Well, they got home around 1:30 a.m. But hours later, Lorraine Snyder, that was their daughter, alerted their neighbors of an incident that had taken place at their home and that her family had been hurt. She said, Mommy is sick. Well, the neighbor, Louis Mailhauser, he called the police before rushing over to the Snyder home. He entered finding the front door open. Ruth Snyder was waiting for him at the bottom of the stairs, trying to maintain consciousness while her legs were bound with rope. After working to remove her from the restraints, Mr. Mailhauser brought her to an adjacent bedroom to keep her calm, but soon after, Louis Mailhauser discovered Albert Snyder in the next room lying face down with a handgun by his side. Police soon arrived at the scene and discovered complete chaos. They found that the house had been completely ransacked when they got inside. Ruth was comforted by Mr. Mailhauser while she was downstairs and being kept separate from her husband. When they spoke to Mr. Mailhauser, though, he briefed them on what he believed had occurred and how the young daughter had come rushing over to his house and how he had hurried over to investigate. George Vincent McLaughlin, the commissioner of New York City Police, good guy, he showed a particular interest in this matter. He arrived a little bit after the police and started questioning Ruth. The Daily News reported this exact statement. We had been to a party at the home of Mr. and Mrs. William Fidgen, 8935 Hollis Court Boulevard in Queens. We had a great time and we drank quite a bit. We got home at 1:30 in the morning. I went upstairs to my room while Albert drove the car to the back. The front door was open for about 5 minutes. We have separate rooms. Some little time after I went up to bed, I got up and I thought I heard Lorraine calling. Lorraine is our daughter. She's 9. As I stepped out from the room, I went toward her room, and I passed another room, the room where my mother stays when she's with us. A man came out of that room and hit me in the head. I believe that I heard him call to someone downstairs below. It was around 8 o'clock when I awoke. I was stiff and strained, bound and gagged. I had a hard time taking those ropes off my hands. Then I took the gag out of my mouth and I tried to scream. Ruth was able to provide a sketchy description of the assailant. Now, she said that he spoke terrible English and looked Italian. He wore a black slouch hat and had a long black mustache. She claimed that she didn't see the other man, though. The commissioner then went to examine Albert Snyder's body. There was blood everywhere, all over the mattress, all over everything. He appeared to have been strangled with picture wire. He also appeared to have his head bashed in with a blunt object. I mean, like in the garrote, you know, that thing they use like a lot of times in movies and stuff where they put her on the garrote used had sliced his throat all the way across. It was a horrific sight. And I mean, Detective 101, his pockets were turned inside out. What does that tell you? A robbery gone wrong, right? Well, the commissioner went back to Ruth and inquired about Mr. Snyder's pocket change. And after giving it some thought, she informed them that her husband had withdrawn more than $100 earlier that day. The commissioner took Ruth around and asked her to list any valuables that had disappeared from the home. She instantly saw her jewelry box was missing some jewels, a bracelet, and 3 rings. She also found her expensive fur coat was missing. The commissioner had his own opinions about the robbery story, and his years and experience on the police force, he could tell that this was not a professional job. And also by the fact that certain things should have been disturbed and they weren't. And then other things that were disturbed shouldn't have been. I mean, yes, it had appeared that someone had targeted the jewelry and, I mean, things like that. But the suspect also removed every single drawer out of the kitchen. It would have been exceedingly noisy and provided little to no benefit. So why would someone do that? Ruth and her daughter had more questions from the commissioner that they needed to answer, but they decided to transfer Albert Snyder's body first. Now, they made the decision to do the interview at the police station rather than having them present when this happened. Unfortunately, reporters had already learned about what was happening and arrived at the house as they prepared to leave. Now, this is early 1900s, so it wasn't like, you know, People magazine and, you know, National Enquirer and all that. I mean, like, there was no Twitter. I mean, so they probably just, I don't know how, somebody from the police department had to, they may have been listening to, I don't know if they had scanners back then. I don't know how they found out. Anyway, they found out. Well, the commissioner informed the reporters that when they inquired, because they asked if she was being detained, that Ruth was not a suspect. She was merely going down to the station to be questioned away from the coroners and the medical examiner's team. Ruth and Lorraine were split up when they got to the police station so that they could be questioned separately. When they both finished, the commissioner had learned a few interesting items to report on the crime scene. Now, during the police examination of the house, all of the items that Ruth had noticed, noted that were missing, were located. All of them were found, get this, under her mattress. They went to talk to the 9-year-old Lorraine first before asking Ruth about this. And she was asked if her parents had ever argued, and she freely admitted that they argued frequently. Well, armed with this new information, they began looking at Ruth a little differently. They dispatched detectives to search the residence as they didn't want them to focus on her as a suspect before they had investigated their leads. The commissioner also dispatched detectives to the home of Mr. and Mrs. William Fidgen to inquire about their knowledge about what happened. They informed police that the Snyders attended the party that was hosted by them the night of the murder. Mr. Fidgen told detectives that the evening was largely unremarkable. They held these gatherings frequently, playing cards and whatnot, and Ruth and Mrs. Fidgen were great friends who attended the same school. It was widely known that Albert didn't enjoy parties and that he didn't really want to go, but, you know, Ruth insisted on dragging him along every time. Mr. George Huff, the brother of Mrs. Fidgen, and Albert got into a verbal fight. When Albert lost a hand of cards, he got pissed, and George and Albert had to be kept separate to keep them from getting physical. Now, George needed to be looked into further. Mr. Fidgen told detectives that George would have gone directly to his hotel room after the party because it was so late, and he ought to arrive there about 1 a.m. because the celebration ended around that time. The Fidgens were essentially eliminated as suspects by the detectives. They didn't appear to harbor any animosity toward the Snyders, and if they were attacked so soon after their home, the Fidgens were still observing lingering guests at their residence, preventing them from having the opportunity to even go out over there and commit this deadly act. Detectives were able to verify with hotel personnel that after the party, around 1 a.m., George Huff came into the hotel and went straight to his hotel room. Consequently, investigators determined that though he did have a motive, George didn't commit this murder. I mean, it resulted in another investigational dead end. The detectives returned to the Snyder's house and continued to investigate there. They discovered 2 more potential pieces of evidence. The first was close to the scene of Mr. Snyder's murder, and it was a little pin bearing the letters J.G. on the reverse side of it. The pin was believed to be Mrs. Snyder's, and they found it odd that she would have something so private with initials that weren't hers or those of her husband's on the back of it. When they searched the basement, an address book was found. Now, what's going on here? It was an address book. It was discovered in a hidden location. 27 men's names and addresses were listed in that book. Little black book much? All of these men were researched by the investigators at the police station. One of the detectives who looked through this address book, he devised a little plan. He reasoned that the initials of the pen might correspond with someone in Ruth's address book. If those names contain the names of men that she might be seeing on the side, then maybe they could link up some guy with the initials JG with a motive. And there it was. One name in the book that matched the initials on the pen. JG, Judd Gray was his name. Once the detectives connected the dots, they returned to question Ruth Snyder along with the commissioner. They were planning to push her much more aggressively this time. Like, what kind of connection did she share with her husband? Ruth said that while her husband was the complete opposite of her, that she was somewhat of a night owl. And she outright denied that when they asked her about them arguing often. But when detectives informed her that her own daughter had told them that of their fighting, she changed her tune. She said they were at odds all the time, leading to several arguments amongst their family. They moved the line of questioning about the stolen items.
What the hell is even that?
They moved the line of questioning to the stolen items and whether she was aware of their whereabouts. They informed her that they were under her mattress. And again, Ruth changed her story. She said she must have forgotten they were there. Just slipped my mind. Seems to be a running theme with these people. When they abruptly asked her who Judd Gray was, she looked like she had seen a ghost. She sat up very straight and seemed very concerned. The detectives observed her intently without asking any questions. They just sat there, let her sit there. I mean, as you crime junkies, you crime show junkies know, it is nearly impossible for a guilty suspect to just sit there and remain silent. I mean, soon after the silence will be broken by the guilty party because they just can't take the heat. Ruth did exactly that. And what she stated completely changed the course of the investigation. Did he confess? Ooh. That raised some eyebrows on the detectives, and they said, yes, he did, because they ain't got to tell the truth. There's no law on the book saying that the police detectives, when you're being interrogated, have to tell you the truth. No, ma'am. They can tell you anything they want to get your confession. It's completely allowed. Well, is that entrapment? No. They're just putting you against yourself, boo, and if you're guilty, you fell for it. Meh. Anyway, they said yes, he did. Well, Ruth continued to tell the tale while sobbing at that point. She admitted that she had been friends with benefits, with Gray for about 2 years. Since they had been seeing each other behind her husband's back for most of their relationship, several times they have discussed killing her husband. Well, that doesn't seem like a great relationship. The desired approach was poison, but they were unable to successfully implement it. Too stupid. As a result, Gray waited for them to get home outside their house on the night of the murder. After Albert had fallen asleep, Ruth let Albert into the house. They had already decided that they would kill Albert and make it look like a robbery. Gray took a weight and went upstairs and struck Albert Snyder on top of his head twice. To make sure he was dead, Judd then used the picture wire as a garrote. Ruth claimed that other than allowing him entry into the house, that she played absolutely no further role in her husband's passing. Gray was solely responsible, and after that, they inquired about the pin they had discovered on the ground. Ruth did not like that line of questioning. She revealed that it was her husband's first love to them. Jesse Guichon, Guichon. She'd given it to Albert shortly before she passed away. Since then, he had kept it close with him. Jessie was the best woman in the world in his eyes, bar none. It was so awesome, I believe, that beyond the grave, Jessie helped these detectives get their best lead that helped them close this case. I think that's so cool. I totally believe it was her pen. Totally. Anyway, they only discovered this jarring piece of evidence by accident, despite the fact that their presumptions also helped. Well, Judd Gray, he was questioned, and he explained that he was a guest at the Syracuse, New York hotel, and he was in his room when the police showed up, and he was immediately taken into custody and accused of the murder. Judd categorically refuted the accusations that were made against him. They found a metal bar and ripped clothing in his room, but they couldn't find anything else that directly connected him to the crime. As you know, Ruth had already confessed to the crime when they brought Judd in for interrogation, but they already knew that he had committed the crime. The two were detained by the police overnight. The news outlets went nuts over this story and covered every single detail as it broke. More and more proof was revealed to the public as a result of the ongoing publicity, and officers were informed by a man who worked at a nearby hotel that he had letters from Ruth for Mr. Gray. To ensure Mrs. Gray would never see them, she would mail them to the hotel. The mail was read by the detectives once they collected it, giving them more information. Mrs. Snyder wrote the letters. She was announcing to Gray that she was so thrilled about something, and they're assuming that she was talking about murdering Albert. Each letter bore Ruth's signature, "Love, your mommy." Well, the press, they received a leak of this and they jumped all over it. And from that point forward, some publications even referred to Ruth as Gray's mommy, quote, making fun of the circumstances. I'm telling you, journalism ain't changed much now, has it? Well, Ruth and Gray were both charged with killing Albert Snyder. However, they both entered a not guilty plea on March 22nd, 1927, blaming the other for the murder. When they heard the whole tale, Ruth's lawyer thought that she would be exonerated. She didn't commit the murder. She couldn't be found guilty of it.
Me? I didn't do this.
Gray's lawyer claimed that Ruth killed the victim despite Gray being present and that his client didn't commit the murder. Whatever happened to that? I guess they hadn't implemented yet that federal law of if you were caught committing a felony and in the act of that felony a person dies, then you're responsible for that murder. In Texas, that's called the hourglass law of parties. Remember from Ryan Rice's trial. Anyway, well, Gray and Ruth were put on trial together, and each of them accused one another of murdering Albert Snyder. Idiots. In addition to the admissions and the autopsy report, the prosecution also used the letters as proof of both of their involvement. Gray claimed that they both used the large weight to strike Albert in the head, and when he struck Albert, he made an effort to stand back up. Gray said that's when Ruth took the weight and struck Albert again in the head. And then they both used the picture wire to strangle him. Oh my gosh. Well, according to the coroner, Albert was already dead when they attempted to strangle him. So, I mean, he was killed by the strikes in the head. Ruth aimed to persuade the jurors during the trial that she was not involved in her husband's death. Gray did all of this on his own. She was just a standby. She just let him in the door. I mean, she also claimed that Gray had her do things like increase Albert's life insurance from $15,000 to $25,000. I mean, she even says that she attempted to stop Gray when he started attacking her husband, but he pushed her to the ground to get her out of the way.
Lies. Oh, lies!
I don't believe any of this garbage. By the time she was able to stand back up, Gray had finished Albert off. Gosh, I mean, seriously? Gray said that Ruth played a significant role in the murder's planning and that she even killed Albert as a result of her own activities. He also said that she had manipulated him, Judd, since she was aware of his feelings for her and he was duped by her into killing her spouse. But she was solely to blame. For the benefit of the jury, he even performed a reenactment of the crime. I mean, which I think is pretty effing sick. I mean, dude, that seems really inappropriate. I mean, don't you think? Anyway, the jury, they deliberated for a short 98 minutes. Mwah! And you know what that means. They returned a guilty verdict for both Ruth Snyder and Judd Gray committed first-degree murder. You know what that means, boys? Their punishment was set at death. What method did they choose?
Electric chair.
What she said. Now get this. They went to trial on March 22nd, 1927. Judd and Ruth were put to death back to back on January 12th, 1928. Like, there were no appeals. I mean, I'm all about the death penalty. You all know that. But only if they are really guilty. I mean, I don't play lightly with that. I mean, this case, I mean, no, both of these fools are guilty. But what is this? What if this had been good old Ray Crone? Click there after you're done with this. Thank God the justice system has changed. I mean, well, I think that appeals go on way too long. And I mean, some of these cases, they don't have things like DNA and hard evidence. I mean, you've got to be damn sure that you got the right person. As Simon Whistler, one of my favorite YouTubers, says, the past was the worst. So anyway, I'm glad that we've gone a little bit forward with technology and whatnot and can really get these people that are guilty and exonerate those who are not, because nobody needs to die that's not guilty. But if you are guilty, get out of here. Now, back to these disturbing details. I know you guys like this part. Judd was assigned to be electrocuted first. He had just finished reading a letter from his wife forgiving him when they came for him. That gave him a lot of peace. What a great guy. He entered the room and spoke a few words of caution before his death. Ruth would follow soon after. Guards escorted her inside and gave her permission to speak, and she was acting erratically and appeared to have aged a lot since the trial. And she argued that she was too young to pass away and pleaded with God to pardon them for what they had done to her. She prayed that when they started the electrocution, well, it kind of faded away. And 3 minutes later, while still in that chair, she was out. What makes this case stand out from all the others is that the Daily News reporter, I mean, this guy, he brought in a little secret camera inside the execution room, and he captured the very first photograph of a death penalty punishment being administered. Ruth claimed to be too young at the time, you know, saying that, I'm too young, I'm so sorry, God forgive them. But her image of her being executed as a young woman, it will live on forever. I mean, this picture, it quickly rose to the top of many lists of the most striking execution images in criminal justice history. This case was also inspiration for a hugely famous movie called Double Indemnity. Now, it was a famous psychological thriller that involves a housewife and a man she's having an affair with, killing her husband. They kill him to trigger the double indemnity clause of certain insurance policies that doubles the reward in the unlikely cause that the death is accidental. A robbery, perhaps. That is it for this case. This one is an oldie but a goodie. I have a real problem with infidelity. So, I mean, I have a hard time feeling sorry for these two. But, I mean, I had not heard of this case until I started researching cases for this channel in December of 2021. And this is an important case for criminal justice. And I mean, while the two murdering, selfish, good-for-nothing pieces of crap covered in this story don't need to be remembered, the images captured and the birth of dramatic realities of penalties for murder, that needs to be retold. And Albert was probably non-emotional, but he wanted to be a good provider and a good father. So there's something to be said about him. But those are just my assumptions. I mean, I hate this most for Lorraine. I mean, of course, Lorraine Snyder, she was still alive, and she was in no better terms orphaned. She was only 9, remember? Josephine Brown, Ruth Snyder's mother, finally took custody of her after having taken care of Lorraine since the murder. Lorraine was fortunately not present for the execution, and she never was even brought to prison, thank goodness. The insurance policy that Ruth and Judd wanted so badly reportedly paid Lorraine the $30,000, but the rest of the policies worth $45,000 and $50,000, those were voided after the insurance companies found out that they were fraudulently filed. So, a probate and estate court ruled in November of 1928 that the policies couldn't be collected. There was $4,000 that was rewarded to Josephine Brown for the costs associated with raising little Lorraine. Lorraine obviously knew that her father was dead and that something was really wrong with her mother, but she didn't know the reason why until almost a year after the execution. Oh my gosh. And you know, this is before therapy was a thing. So she just had to deal with it at 10 or 11 years old. Ugh. Well, from the thoughtless decisions of Snyder and Gray to the crazy sensationalism of the press coverage in this case is memorialized historically forever in photos and also in film through Double Indemnity. It's one of the most famous true crime cases of the 20th century, and I'd never even heard of it. Shows you what I know, I guess. Until next time, try not to plan any murders, and more importantly, don't write anything down. Ugh! We'll see you really soon in the next video. We'll see y'all later.